Hello, BookTube. Well, it's Wednesday, and that means Epic Comic Book Wednesday, when Michael K. Vaughan and I combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we've wasted our youths, or our adulthoods. Because Michael K. Vaughan has recently embarked, as you may have seen, on an absolutely insane reading plan for comic reading. And he has already committed to it. He is going to read the entire first run, sometimes hundreds and hundreds of issues, of the canonical Marvel character creations from the classic Marvel Age of Comics, created by Stan Lee. And he's made good on his promise because he's already done Thor, the whole run of Thor, from Thor's first appearance in Journey into Mystery all the way until his final Flashdance issues, before the first run of his comic was canceled. And he is moving on from there. The next entire run that he's going to read is the Fantastic Four. I actually thought that after his long run of Thor, he would give himself a little break, but he has launched right on to Fantastic Four right away. That's going to be a lot of fun. I hope we do a lot of talking about the different eras of the Fantastic Four on Epic Comic Book Wednesday to come, because there's a lot to talk about. But for today, for Epic Comic Book Wednesday, he wants to concentrate on Fantastic Four #1. Because unlike a lot of other characters in the original Stan Lee age of Marvel Comics, for Fantastic Four #1, the one that started it all, the one where Stan Lee actually began the Marvel era of comics, it got a #1. It got a first issue. Not everything else did. Spider-Man ended up eclipsing all the rest of the characters in the original age of Marvel Comics. He didn't start with Spider-Man #1. His first appearance was in Amazing Fantasy. Thor did not start off with his own book. Iron Man did not start off with his own book. Doctor Strange did not start off with his own book. Only a few... The Hulk did not. Most of them didn't. But the team books tended to. And the Fantastic Four was the first of those. So we are looking at Fantastic Four #1. All of you of a certain age out there, this is the comic book that your mother threw away when you went to college that could otherwise have paid for your first house. I don't know anymore what... This was a 10-cent comic. I don't remember anymore what a mint condition first issue of Fantastic Four sells for today in the comic book market. I wouldn't be surprised if it's $100,000. It wouldn't be... Maybe more than that. It might be a lot more than that. I don't know how many of these there are in circulation. I think that for a brief period, a long, long time ago, when friends used to swap comics with each other, we used to trade comics with each other, I think that for a brief time I had this. And I either destroyed it, or my Beagles destroyed it, or I traded it back to somebody, maybe because I didn't think it was any good. And you know why I would have thought that? Because it isn't any good. It's quite possibly, with the exception of Avengers #1, it's quite possibly the worst first issue of any comic book ever in the pre-modern era, prior to 2000, the year 2000. Quite possibly the worst first issue of any comic ever. This is what Michael K. Vaughan refers to as patient zero of the Stan Lee virus. I've dubbed the Stan Lee virus as the thing that Stan Lee wanted to do with superhero comics. He didn't just want to make his own superheroes. He wanted to do something different with them. He wanted to introduce continuity so that what happened to them in issue 15, they all remember in issue 50, and it might affect the events of issue 50. And he wanted to introduce verisimilitude, so that if a character can't fly, they have to take a cab. That characters might not like each other. They might have hang-ups, man. Do you get the jive I'm laying down? Why anyone would want to introduce any of these things into superhero comics, I don't know. But Stan Lee did, and boy oh boy did fans eat it up. They loved it. They even loved it from this first issue, although how they did, I don't know. So let's go through this first issue, shall we? Let's go through this. I've done this before in a video that I'll try to remember to link down below. But we can go into a lot more detail this time around about this first issue and how absolutely awful it is. And believe it or not, Stan Lee doesn't need any time to get to awful. It starts with awful. This cover is awful. You might think it's not because it's completely iconic. In the comic book world, there are only a handful of covers that are more iconic than this. But it is. The cover is terrible because it doesn't make any sense. Shall we see why? Shall we look around and see why? Let's look at why this doesn't make any sense. Here we have a monster hauling its way up out of a city street. And it is being confronted by 4 characters. It has the female character in its grip. A flaming character swooping down to attack. There are these 2 others in the foreground. Let's look at the dialogue. The woman is saying, I can't turn invisible fast enough. How can we stop this creature? Torch? What does that mean? Are you going to be helping the battle by turning invisible faster? It already has you in its hand. Why would you turn invisible at all? It's not even looking at you. But anyway, the dialogue then moves on to the Torch, a character who's been identified as Torch. Just wait and see, sister. Okay, so those 2 are related. The Fantastic Four have only begun to fight. So these 4 characters are called the Fantastic Four. Okay, great. But that's a lie. This monster has only just barely appeared. Only a fifth of its body is above the ground. It's breaking through the surface of the road. So in fact, the Fantastic Four have just begun to fight. The woman has just said that she didn't even have time to turn invisible. In other words, the fight can't be more than a few seconds old. So the Fantastic Four have, in fact, just begun to fight. Then we move to this guy down at the bottom there. And he says, it'll take more than ropes to keep Mr. Fantastic out of action. All right, so we know his name. It's Mr. Fantastic. The BookTube, who tied him up? Did the monster do that? I don't think so. The monster doesn't look like it knows, it's Boy Scout knots. Or brought any clothesline with it to the surface when its mouth is as big as a city block. So what on earth is that? What does that even mean? Obviously, you know what it means. It's just a gimmick to show that this character can turn rubbery. So why isn't the character over here reaching a rubbery arm in that direction? Why instead do we have an inept gimmick like this, which calls for a different plot? And then we have the final character, who, as we can see, is made of lumps and is crushing a car. And he says, the 3 of you can't do it alone. It's time for the Thing to take a hand. Well, presumably, since the fight is only a few seconds long, yeah, it would be time for you to take a hand. This whole thing is wrong. The whole cover is terrible. Featuring the Thing, Mr. Fantastic, the Human Torch, and Invisible Girl together for the first time in one mighty magazine. Together for the first time. But we've never seen any of these characters before. So, anyway, that's just a cover. Then we move on to the events, which in this issue take place in Central City. They obviously take place in Manhattan, and the location will be called Manhattan very soon. But in this first issue, written by Stan Lee and drawn by Jack Kirby, it's Central City. And Central City, the people of Central City are being the witness to a phenomenon in the sky. A signal flare that says, the Fantastic Four, with an exclamation point. Okay. Can't get a signal flare to do that. At all. But why would you want a signal flare to do that anyway? Are you calling for the Fantastic Four? Are you identifying the Fantastic Four? Why would you want a signal flare to do this? Except if you were making it the title of a comic book. But we get a mysterious figure. The police are up in arms. They're wondering... Oh, issue was so bad that the police are wondering if it's an alien invasion. But we see a mysterious figure at a window who says, it is the first time I have found it necessary to give the signal. I pray it will be the last. Well, you already know who you are. So you wouldn't need to make a signal that says your name unless you were introducing yourself to other people. Which means that you don't expect this to be the last time that you use it. And then we're told that the words blend into a number. The words of the signal eventually blend into the number 4. Which, again, signals don't do. But this is a signal that man at the window has given the signal to other people so that they can see it and know that something has now commenced. And we gradually meet those people. One is Susan Storm, who's having tea in society. She's having tea with some friends of hers. When a friend says, Susan, look at those words in the sky. What do they mean? And Susan says, so it has happened at last. I must be true to my vow. There can be no turning back. And she turns invisible. and walks out of the room. Her friend has no idea where she's gone. The reasoning here, I think, that we're supposed to get is that Sue views the words, the Fantastic Four, with an exclamation point, up in the air, as her signal to turn invisible and go on some mission, fulfill some vow. But Sue does not check to see what those words are. This was an era of skywriting. How does she know it's not Joe's Mechanics or Al's Beef, best burger in town? How does she know that? She doesn't look herself. She doesn't verify herself. Instead, she turns invisible, knocks over all these people, finds a cab driver who's waiting because he doesn't have any fares. The cab driver says, might as well cruise around and pick me up a fare. She has no idea that he's going to do that, and she has no idea where he's going to go. Apparently, by sheer coincidence, he takes her where she wants to go, and he is not aware that a person is sitting in the back seat of his cab when he does so. Apparently, it doesn't move the cab. Apparently, she doesn't have any cologne or perfume on. Apparently, she doesn't say anything or breathe or rustle or move. And then he sees the fare floating in front of him, and he drives off in a hurry. She had no way of knowing that he was going where she wanted her to go. But if she was going to take a cab to get to the building, I presume the building where the man with the flare is, why would she do this? Why wouldn't she just take a cab there? Why would she turn invisible? Obviously, she can't ever know this friend again. She's alarmed all these people who are now going to report to the police that something weird is going on. She's starting a panic. She didn't get to hail a cab and tell the cabbie where she wants to go. Why? Why did she do any of this? Why doesn't she just take a cab where she wants to go? And you're going to see that stays true for the other people who are being signaled. One of the other people who's being signaled is this guy. He's at a men's clothing store. And the man behind the counter is saying, I'm sorry, we just don't have anything in your size. BookTube, look at that picture. Does this figure look from that picture like he's too big for anything that this clothing store has? He's a big man. He's already wearing clothes, including pants. Obviously, this shop would have clothes that fits him. Obviously, it would. So, no idea what that is, but the man points out the window and says, oh, look at those letters in the sky. Those words, the Fantastic Four. What can they mean? Again, this other person does not look himself. He takes it again on hearsay. Oh, the Fantastic Four. Oh, that means a mission. That means I am summoned. And he takes off his coat and leaves the shop. And it turns out he's a gigantic, rocky, orange monster. Okay. But he walked in with those clothes, including, as you can clearly see, long pants and shoes. So where are they? Why does he disrobe, in other words, to leave this shop? Leaving aside the fact that he has to blast his way out the door when he obviously came in the door in order to get into the shop. Would he go sideways the first time? But why does he do this? Why does he disrobe in order to leave? And why does he take his pants and shoes off? Why? He does this so that he can make his way to, presumably, the man with the flare. And the police see him right away and take a shot at him. And he has to rip open a manhole with his bare hands, dive into the sewers, and crawl his way along until he estimates that he is where he belongs and can burst up through the street cement again. We're told his first shot missed because he was so nervous, but he'll not get another chance. In BookTube, I want you to, those of you who maybe have held a gun in your life, I want you to play along with me. His first shot missed because he was so nervous. He'll not get another chance. That is enough time for this police officer to empty his revolver and maybe even reload. So this shot goes wild and kills someone on the sidewalk, but he could easily have shot many more. But again, why does this character do this? Why? This character obviously did not do this to get to that men's clothing store. There's no panic in the street before this. Why doesn't he just say, a signal? Well, I'm going to get where I need to go the same amount of time anyway. This is bound to take longer. Why don't I just walk the way I got here? Why does the character do this? Other than stupid dramatics. in the real world, if you're going to bring verisimilitude into the comics world, then none of this makes any sense at all. And then we get another member of this quartet, a teenage boy, who he and his friend are souping up his hot rod. At least I think that's what they're doing. We're told this is another part of town, another part of Central City. The friend says, "We've got her purring as gentle as a lamb, Johnny." And lambs don't purr. So I don't really know what they're doing with this car. But Johnny is just minding his business. He's mad for hot rods. When his friend notices those words, they've all come together. They're turning into the number 4. No flare would do that. State-of-the-art fireworks that the Chinese or the people in New York might put off in New Year's Eve might be able to do that. But a flare will not do that. And would be gone by now anyway. But it turns into the number 4. And it turns out that this boy, Johnny, is the other member of this quartet. And he is sitting in a hot rod that is running just fine. It's purring like a lamb. He could simply say, okay, thanks, I see it now. I've got to go, and drive to his destination. He's in a car. But instead, he decides to burst into flame and fly to his destination. I want to point out here that the amount of heat necessary, especially sudden heat, necessary to liquefy both metal and rubber would easily kill his friend at that distance. So maybe the friend is dead? I don't know. Like the bystander who's shot when the Rocky Monster dodges a bullet? I have no idea. Instead, the people see this character blazing across the sky, this flaming human figure blazing across the sky. This comic book came out in 1961. In just a few issues, Prince Namor the Submariner is going to make a guest appearance. The first of many guest appearances. Prince Namor the Submariner was a character that Stan Lee knew very well from all of his adventures in the 1940s and 50s. Prince Namor and Captain America were signature characters of the precursor to Marvel Comics. They were World War II era superheroes. And you know who was the other most famous World War II superhero? You're going to say Captain Marvel. No. You're going to say Captain Marvel Jr. No. You're going to say Superman. No. The Human Torch. A character called the Human Torch. The original Human Torch was an android who was a public hero. He was well known. People loved him. And in the world of this comic book, the verisimilitude world of this comic book, that is just 20 years ago. So why aren't these people pointing up in the sky and saying, oh, it's the Human Torch? Why aren't they doing that? Leaving aside the fact, as I mentioned in an earlier video about this issue, that this is just Stan Lee plagiarizing. He's plain up stealing this idea. This isn't the original Human Torch. At least when he reintroduces the Submariner, it will be the same guy. This isn't. This is just him stealing an idea. The Torch, we're told that the Torch is in another part of town getting his hot rod souped up so that it's purring like a lamb. But then we're told that almost an hour elapses. He's still in the air when the Air Force is able to send out jets to intercept him. And the jet pilots say, flaming object, huh? Someone must have flipped his lid. Of all the wild goose hey, what's that? It is a flaming object. Why don't the jet pilots say, must be the Human Torch? Over the loudspeaker, we can ask him what he's doing, but that's who it must be. It must be the Human Torch. I and my father are familiar with a flaming figure flying over Central City. Instead, they engage with the Human Torch, and he is such a neophyte at controlling himself that he starts to burn some of the planes down. Pilots have to parachute out, but one of them gets off a missile. And BookTube, it's not just any missile. Johnny Storm says, I can't escape it. It's too fast. It has a nuclear warhead. If it explodes, I'm a goner. Okay, typical teenage narcissism. Johnny, if a nuclear warhead explodes over Central City, you're not the only one who's a goner. Okay? Millions of people will be goners. So you're assuming, well, at least that won't happen. I mean, this thing will chase him, but he's faster. He's more maneuverable. He'll get away. But instead, elongated arms stretch up out of nowhere, grab the missile, and throw it into the nearby water. These arms are not infinite, and the person who's wielding it has not infinite strength. So, although we're told the bomb explodes harmlessly over the sea, this is in Central City Harbor. This is in New York City Harbor, where a nuclear bomb explodes. A nuclear warhead goes off. For some reason, the torch's flame gives out right then. It doesn't give out any earlier when the arms couldn't have reached him. It gives out right then, and the arms catch him. They belong to the final member of this group, the guy who fired the flare, Mr. Fantastic, from the cover, obviously. We're told in this caption that when Johnny Storm's flame gives out, he is falling to his doom. I want to point out that this would also be his doom. But instead, Mr. Fantastic catches him. Now, keep in mind, Mr. Fantastic fired his flare, the magic flare that turns from words and an exclamation point to a number, in plain view of a whole bunch of people. Everyone could see where it came from. Certainly everyone could see where all these people are going. They're all converging on the same building. So I'm presuming that once they all get together, and notice that for some reason the Rocky guy has put on another trench coat, another hat, another pair of glasses, presumably another pair of pants, and another pair of shoes. He left all those things at the men's clothing store, but he somehow puts them on again when he is around the only people in the world who know what he looks like. So he doesn't have to disguise himself. But I'm assuming that the very next thing, now that they're all together, the very next thing we're going to see is this guy, Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, standing trial at The Hague for exploding a nuclear weapon in New York Harbor and killing God knows how many millions of people. But no, we never hear from it again. And you might think, wow, that's weird. Weird for a first issue to have a casual nuclear explosion. I guess the author had to get his sea legs under him. He'll certainly never make that mistake again. No? You sure? You sure that Stan Lee won't make that mistake again? How about that he won't make that mistake in the same issue? We're not there yet. Instead, we now get to meet these characters because once they're together, they flash back to their origin story. Where this guy, Ben Grimm, who becomes the orange lumpy creature, the Thing, is arguing with Reed Richards that they're not ready to take their maiden spaceflight on his rocket ship because cosmic ray radiation in low Earth orbit will be too dangerous. And Ben Grimm is talked into the flight by Sue Storm, who says, well, you don't want the commies to beat us to it, do you? Reed Richards never says a word. He doesn't say what he wants to do. We never hear from him what he wants to do. We can gather from what Ben Grimm is saying that he wants to go to fly his rocket ship. But no idea why he doesn't wait until their research on cosmic rays is complete. And also no idea is those of you who are very young will not know who commies are. That was the Soviet Union. Those are the Russians. They were the big enemy. And Sue Storm apparently thinks, well, that's the ultimate mortification, that they get it to put a rocket in space before we do. And that's enough for Ben Grimm. She's not going to call him a coward. He's going along. And so is Sue, and so is her kid brother. They go to a spaceport on the outskirts of town. That might be where you'd put a spaceport. But it wouldn't be a podunk spaceport. It wouldn't be the kind of spaceport that we're getting. Because this is what we're getting. This panel here. There's the towering rocket in the distance, and there's a guard. One guard. And somehow he doesn't see these people. They're not only running by him, they're talking while they do it. Apparently there's no one keeping an eye on this rocket, and there are no other guards, just this one guy. So they can go all that way. Keep in mind, from this smallest figure to that rocket is probably a quarter of a mile. They're going all that way without anyone seeing what they're doing. And there are buildings around this rocket, but there aren't anything in the way of control rooms or gantries of any kind. And that's just as well, because once Reed and his friends get on board, they blast off. Reed says in this panel, there's no time to wait for official clearance. Conditions are right tonight. Okay, but conditions will be right on other nights when you've finished your research about deadly radiation, before you bring your girlfriend up there and her kid brother. Conditions will be right on other nights. And we're told that this is the mighty ship Reed Richards had spent years constructing. Okay, but he's at a spaceport, so he's not constructing it on his own. Is he constructing it in league with the U.S. government? I think it's safe to assume that he is. It's not his property. Otherwise, he could travel on it whenever he wants to. They have to sneak past a guard to get on this thing. So although he has been building this thing, he doesn't have the sole use of it. This is an unauthorized flight. And he needs Ben Grimm. They've all got suits that seem to be tailor-made for them and that are waiting. Somehow, they don't go to any kind of bunker on the grounds to change into their suits. Maybe they're wearing them in the car. They can't. They have to run in their suits straight to the rocket. They can't prepare, or someone in this installation will know it. So they get on board the rocket, and they go into space with Ben Grimm piloting the whole time, because that's why he comes along, right? He says, no one's going to pilot this thing but me. He was a champion pilot during World War II, not of rockets, because they didn't exist, but he's their champion pilot. And sure enough, the minute they get into space, they hit cosmic radiation. And it disables them all, including Ben Grimm, their pilot. And the ship lands a perfect lateral landing with almost no damage. The ship is whole, and the crew are unharmed. And why, you might think? Well, in this panel, Ben Grimm says somebody else has to take the controls. I can't handle it. But you must think in this panel that surely he recovered. But no, we're told that the ship's powerful autopilot took over. So why is Ben Grimm on this mission? If the ship has an autopilot powerful enough to get it down in perfect shape from a crash landing from space, why is Ben Grimm on this trip at all? Why is anybody on this trip? If the ship can do this, why isn't Reed Richards doing this alone? Out of pride. And also, anyway, we realize that the crew has been affected by the cosmic radiation. They've all gained superpowers. They are all bright, white, glowing, radioactive beings, but they're not. They each gain a different superpower. They don't get radiation sickness. They're not dying. And as we're going to learn in 30 or 40 issues, the obvious result of this little encounter with cosmic rays, which is that Sue Storm would be infertile, doesn't happen. None of the normal things for radiation happen. Instead, they get superpowers. She is able to turn invisible. At first, not consciously. She turns invisible without wanting to, and she reappears without wanting to. But we assume that she can control it. Ben Grimm transforms into a rocky monster who is super powerful. He's super strong. Reed Richards turns into can plastify his body. Notice that in all three cases, the three of them don't know that their powers are going to manifest. They just act, and their powers do. But they will gain control over them with time. And lastly, of course, Johnny Storm realizes he can burst into flame and fly. And he starts a forest fire, which we're told harmlessly burns itself out in the underbrush, which is not what forest fires do. They even stand around watching instead of calling for help or anything. Are there homes nearby? Who knows? Where did they land? No idea. Certainly they were watched. They had to be watched. The Air Force would scramble planes. They scrambled planes when Johnny Storm appeared over Central City. They did that in under an hour. Surely if an absolutely unique spacecraft were stolen, they'd be all over it. Instead, they're not. No one bothers the Fantastic Four. No one has Reed Richards on trial at the Pentagon for stealing government equipment. Stealing and, I presume, destroying. I'm assuming that rocket that crash lands isn't usable anymore. It's not his rocket. He steals it. He breaks into a federal installation. So not only at The Hague for nuking New York City, Central City, but also at the Pentagon for crimes against the government. No. Instead, they all band together again. Here we've got they crash land. They were wearing spacesuits. They crash land. They discover that they have superpowers. For some reason, Reed Richards says, we have more power than any humans have ever possessed. Almost the weakest. I won't say the weakest. Not Batman and not Aquaman. But almost the weakest single member of the Justice League could beat these four clowns easily. Easily. And that's not talking about the upper echelon of the Justice League. Obviously, the Martian Manhunter's out of the equation because he's vulnerable to fire. But Green Lantern? Please. Wonder Woman? But Reed says, together we four have more power than any humans have ever possessed. And the Thing says, you don't have to make a speech, Big Shot. We understand. We've got to use that power to help mankind. Why? Why would you do that? How do you know that these powers are going to last even an hour? Why would you do that and make a solemn oath to do it? And also, while you're making your oath, where does he get the glasses and the trench coat? Where does he get them? Or are we shifting back to them remembering their past? It could be that. But now we get to the reason why they were summoned, which is that they have to face the awesome threat of the Mole Man. Nuclear plants are disappearing all over the world. And apparently no armies or navies or air forces of the countries involved are investigating in any way. Their nuclear plants are being sucked into giant holes, and they're not doing anything at all about it. Reed Richards decided that the Fantastic Four, there's this guy again, the Thing again in a trench coat and glasses, indoors. He decides that they have to do something about it. So they take off in their special plane with the number 4 on the side. Where? Why? Whose authority? They're going to Monster Island? Does the rest of the world know that Monster Island exists? How does Reed Richards make a flight plan? Presumably the government knows about this guy. He stole a rocket. Surely they know about him. Do they care that he's flying off on his own? Does he have an airstrip of his own? No, they've just got a plane. They've just got a plane. They go to Monster Island, and Monster Island is full of monsters, obviously. And the team fights those monsters, but they get separated. Reed Richards and Johnny Storm are separated. The ground collapses underneath them, and they panic, and Reed says, "Hold on, Johnny, hold on," and he makes a parachute out of himself. Johnny Storm can fly. He's the only member of the Fantastic Four who can. He can fly. Why doesn't he? No idea. No idea at all. They get separated. They find themselves in a subterranean container, and they are blinded by a bright white light that knocks them unconscious. That will not happen. Bright white doesn't do that, but it knocks them unconscious. And when they wake up, someone has dressed them. Someone has dressed them in these outfits. That is never given an explanation. They're in a valley of diamonds, but that is never given an explanation. Presumably the person who dressed them is the Mole Man, this villain, the Mole Man, who was a surface man, who was despised and rejected by people because he was ugly. I've had many, many jobs. I've never had anyone say where people would laugh at you because you're ugly. So I'm thinking the Mole Man was probably a jerk. Certainly he is now. But he finds a pathway to the center of the earth, and it makes him blind. A little glimpse of what Kirby can do with artwork. Not much of one. A little one. He finds that he has found a subterranean kingdom, but he's lost most of his sight. But when he introduces himself to our friends, he not only has statuary, but paintings. So why does he have those if he can't see them? I wonder why he has those if he can't see them. And he has a master plan. He is responsible. He and his subterranean minions are responsible for those disappearing nuclear power plants. And you can tell by the map he's made. How does he know what he's pointing at? How does he see it? When suddenly his monologuing is interrupted by the Thing and Sue Storm, who somehow managed to find this subterranean sanctum of the Mole Man. They didn't have to go through the weird chamber. They apparently didn't get knocked out by the bright white lights. They didn't have to see the Chamber of Diamonds. They just end up here. And the Mole Man is disturbed by this and calls forth the monster from the cover of the book. And the team partially engages. Partially, the Human Torch flies around this thing, but doesn't do much else to it. The Mole Man tries to run away, and while he's running away, he tries to summon all of his monster companions. And this panel, more than anything else, here, let's see if we can get this lengthwise so we can give it the glory that it's due. That panel, all those monsters erupting from the bowels of Monster Island. Michael K. Vaughan will make a video about this issue. I'm sure it'll be great. I'll leave a link to it down below. He always makes his much earlier than I make mine. And I'm sure he'll go on and on about, bickering personalities and how this was trailblazing and whatnot. But that panel is why he loves this issue. Because he's the sole remaining fan of monster comics. And this is Monster Island. I'm sure he's the only person who ever read Fantastic Four #1 who wished that he could just sort of stay at Monster Island. Can I hear more about these monsters? Never mind the Fantastic Four people. Can I stay on Monster Island? The Mole Man pulls a lever to get all of his monster minions to attack the Fantastic Four. We never learn what happens to the giant monster that he summons the first time. It seems unbeatable. It's certainly too big for this thing to stop. The Invisible can't do anything but turn invisible at this point. Reed Richards can't do anything about it. Johnny Storm can only distract it. We don't learn anything more about that monster. What Johnny Storm does instead is carve a channel here to collapse their cavern on themselves. So all these monsters aren't killed. They're still on this island with the Mole Man. But they get to make a safe getaway in their plane. And as they're flying away, the island nukes itself. We have a second nuclear detonation. Where is Monster Island? Is it off the coast of the United States? They got there in fairly easy time. Where is it? How many people are going to be destroyed by this thermonuclear explosion? We're told it's the best way. There was no place for him in our world. Perhaps he'll find peace down there. I hope so. He and his monsters would be killed by a thermonuclear explosion. It's not a big box of TNT. It's an atom bomb. It's you exploding an atom bomb, or he is. They'd all die. And everything for hundreds of miles around this island would be despoiled forever. Instead, no, that's just the way we end the issue. That's the way we end the issue. With these four crammed into this crappy panel as they fly away from Monster Island. So the Mole Man collapsed all of those nuclear facilities. I presume he's guilty of killing all the people who were in them. Or did he save the nuclear facilities? They're gone now anyway. Are the Fantastic Four going to contact the governments involved and tell them this is what happened to your nuclear reactors? Sorry, you'll just have to believe us. There's absolutely no evidence to this, but you'll just have to believe us. No, yeah, you saw a monster destroy your reactor and you fired on it, but it didn't do any good. But we took care of it. That monster was actually under control of a character called the Mole Man, and we took care of it. Who are you? Who are we? Surely there are a million grounds on which we can arrest you, including breaking the International Nuclear Treaty. That's the first issue of the Fantastic Four. An absolute train wreck, literally from the beginning to the end. Before you even get to the beginning, this is literally a train wreck from beginning to end. This cover is a train wreck, and the first issue just goes on from there. Now, I'm not saying that Fantastic Four #1 is worse than Avengers #1. I don't think any first issue I've ever read is worse than Avengers #1. But this is still right up there. It's right up there. It may be the second worst first issue ever done in the pre-modern era. In the modern era, all first issues are bad. But in the pre-modern era, they used to be something. And this is nothing. This is a whole bunch of nothing. Why would these characters get separate superpowers? And if they did, why would they be suddenly dedicated to fighting for mankind when none of them were beforehand? This is a problem for Stan Lee's verisimilitude, for the Stan Lee virus, is that you have to come up with a believable reason why any of this would work the way it does. Sometimes Stan Lee manages to do that. Peter Parker lets a criminal go by. He's arrogant, he is self-absorbed, he lets a criminal go by, and he pays the ultimate price for that. And that, the guilt and the inflamed sense of righteousness of that, puts him on a path to fighting crime, to righting wrongs, to making amends for that. Stephen Strange was an arrogant surgeon. He wasn't just a great surgeon, he was a horrible person. And when he gains enlightenment at the feet of the Ancient One, the enlightenment gives him mystical abilities, yes, but it also makes him a better person. He's improved as a person, and he is given the superpowers of the current reigning Sorcerer Supreme. That comes with all sorts of incumbent abilities. Dr. Strange never thinks, well, I will go and fight crime on the streets of Manhattan. He never thinks that. So his motivation is believable. But the Fantastic Four? No. Even the X-Men. I mean, the X-Men have a believable motivation. They are in the hands of a zealot who is a telepath. Who knows how much he's affected them. Who believes they are on a mission to help and protect a world that hates and fears them. Because of Xavier's dream of mutants and humans living and working together in peace. Okay, that's fine. And that works. And you don't have to change that much. That works for the run of the X-Men, the original run of the X-Men. The Fantastic Four, why do they do what they do? They have as much of a lack of a motivation as, for instance, Daredevil does. Even the Avengers, yes, their first issue is awful, just awful. But you could see a motivation in that if you're in a Manhattan that's full of superheroes, someone might realize, hey, if we work together, we can handle menaces that we might not be able to handle separately. Okay, that does make sense. And that doesn't... The Avengers eventually get to something like that as a kind of motivation. They don't have it at first. But the Fantastic Four, nothing at all. Nothing at all. Why don't they just go about their business? And where the only drama of all the plot line from then on is Reed Richards trying to cure his friend from looking like a monster. And that's it. But nothing else. Why are they concerned with the Mole Man? Why do they think they have to go flying off? Just because they have so much power? I don't know. It didn't satisfy me then. It's never satisfied me since. It didn't satisfy me. This came out in 1961, probably 10 or 15 years after this. The Fantastic Four retold this origin story with John Buscema artwork that was just great, made it look much better, and I liked it, but I didn't buy it then either. And so the main point here for the start of the next part of Michael K. Vaughan's madcap plan is that, boy, oh boy, do you have nowhere to go but up when it comes to the Fantastic Four. There are so many great, great issues to come. But this, sure as heck, isn't one of them. We have a gigantic body count from these people. But anyway, that's your Epic Comic Book Wednesday for today. It's Fantastic Four #1. Which at the time I would have said 1 is enough. But then again, I was only buying these things on a lark. I was thinking, oh, another superhero company. Oh, that's interesting. At the same time that this comic was coming out, you had Red Kryptonite wreaking havoc in Superman. You had Batman and Robin facing Clayface over in Detective Comics. You had Batmite and Batgirl facing off against each other in Batman. You had Superman introducing Supergirl to an adoring world over in Superman. Why on earth would you read this crap? Why on earth? It'd be the last thing you'd read. It'd be the last thing in a stack of comics that you got. Because you had plenty of real comics to read. But anyway, that's quite enough of that. I'll wrap this up for now at long last, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.